Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton rakaman agenda Awani khas di Persada Johor Bahru. Ini kerana Johor Bahru ingin menjadi bandaraya bertaraf dunia, dan itulah diskusi hari ini. Saya ingin mengambil kesempatan ini untuk berbicara bahasa Inggeris. I would like to welcome a very eminent subject matter expert, Paul Scriven. Thank you so much for making time. Now, there's a lot of ways I could introduce Paul, but I'm just going to say he was the Datuk Bandar of Sheffield. That's how he introduced himself to me. Of course, to be a mayor in Sheffield, he has to be elected. It means he has to go into becoming a politician. He was with the Lib Dem. We'll ask about klik in another session altogether. But for this one, because he came here to share how JB can be a world city by the experiences of maybe Sheffield. And if you Google, Sheffield is the happiest city or town to stay in the UK. Why? There's two versions to it. If you read or Google Daily Mail, it will give the more interesting version, but I'm going to get the more sedate version from Paul. Paul, if you can share with us.
I think it's a sense of people feeling they belong in their city. It's human in scale. People know their neighbours. Neighbours know their neighbours. People come together. The government's facilitated open space or community facilities where people can exchange ideas. Clearly, we've tried to make sure that the city's safe. We're the safest city in the UK. We've invested to make sure that their children get good education. It's everything that you and I would want if we were deciding where to live in Malaysia. We'd want nice parks, a nice place to live, nice place for our children, and somewhere where we feel we belong.
Has it always been like that in Sheffield, or was it a recent transformation?
I think there's always been a friendliness about Sheffield people. I think it's in the DNA of Sheffield people. I moved there 18 years ago, so I'm not originally from Sheffield, and one of the reasons I was drawn there was because of this friendliness. What we did do, though, when I became the Datuk Bandar, was to realise that the city was too big. It's a big city geographically, so people in the north didn't always have the same problems as people of the south. So we split the city into 7 areas. We called them community assemblies. We'd evolved money down there, so local councillors in their community, things like parks and libraries, could make decisions. Do you want your library hours to be this or this? Do you want books or more computers in? What facilities do you want in your libraries? Parks. What do you want in your parks? More children's facilities. Green gyms where you put gym facilities in. But the community decided, so they felt as though they had some ownership, they belonged there, and they had some real say in what happened in their community. And I think that's where kind of happiness came. It's their park, it's their library, they feel they own it, they feel it represents what they want for their community, and it brings people together, maybe people you wouldn't normally see, and over maybe the coffee or in the library or maybe the on the green gym facilities in the park, you speak to people who you wouldn't normally speak to.
This is where I would like to tap into your interest and love for Southeast Asia. And you've declared at this conference in front of more than 300 people that out of all the Southeast Asian countries, you love Malaysia. So I'm going to get your frank opinion here, because some people say it's easy for the UK. You rode the advantages of Industrial Revolution, and we have to, send our raw materials by coercion to help that happen. And we're just starting to develop recently, relatively. So maybe we haven't reached the maturity that Sheffield has, because we're busy trying to do and make the basics. But you have been here, you've consulted, you've been consultant to Intan, for example. So if I can tap into your expertise, because now you're also an entrepreneur and consultant. So how would you see the difference, the main difference between what was done in Sheffield during your time and what is being done now in Malaysia as far as that community engagement is concerned?
I see the aspirations of whether you live in Sheffield or whether you live down in JB the same. You want the best for your family, you want a nice place to live, you want jobs, you want culture. So that's no different. I think it's a kind of what I'd call a sense of letting go. Sensible politicians in the modern world, when you have Twitter, when you have social network, when you have people who understand what happens in the world, realise that they can't control anything. So by letting go, you're not letting go of the important decisions. I wouldn't let go of the major economic decisions which drove the city of Sheffield. But actually, why don't I sit in the city hall and decide what a park looks like? why should I decide what goes into a local library? The best people to know that are communities. So I think there's a sense of, by letting go politicians and the officials somehow lose out. My experience in Sheffield is actually it makes your job much easier. If you're a politician, people tend to be happier with you. But if you're an official, you're using your skills, your expertise, which the community will never have, in a way to wrap round. So I think the real difference is this sense of being paternal, the RIAC, rather than actually letting go and realising they've got ideas, they've got probably the best understanding of what's right for their community, and giving the power to implement things within a framework. It's not anarchy, but it really, I think that's the difference, a sense of just let go and trust people to make decisions within a good governance framework.
If that's the case, why aren't the other areas, the other cities in UK looking at Sheffield? Because if I look and try to understand the UK riots, when you have clearly stated that it didn't happen in Sheffield, but it happened somewhere else, and now the fluidity and mobility of movement, I might be in Manchester, but I also have interest in Sheffield. So how do you look at it? Why aren't that the model being followed, even in the UK?
Well, interestingly, that's now beginning to happen. National government has picked up on examples of Sheffield, and so now there's a thing called the Localism Act, where powers are not just being passed down from central government to local government, because we don't have state government in the UK, but then councils have now this powers for local communities to instruct their councils to hand certain powers down. So if they're going to say, for example, a council's going to sell off a building, before that can happen, the community has a right to what's called community recall, where they can say, we want to purchase and look after the building, can we have it? So that devolution, that sense of belonging, empowering people, is now being enshrined in national legislation, so it is beginning to happen. Because I think national government realises from the Sheffield example that it brings people together, it is more inclusive, and it does make a sense of people feel as though they belong, and it actually helps a city move forward, not just socially, but also economically as well.
In this country, we love politicians. Sometimes this is, people from the outside remarking to me that you guys do nothing else but talk politics. So I do have to tap into the politician side of you, but that will do after this short break. You are still watching a special recording of Agenda Awani on the sideline of a very important conference, how to make JB a world city. And I'm here still with Paul Scriven, so a former Datuk Bandar, but the politician in you, being ruled by the British for so long, we have direct interest, not only politics but also football. But if I go to the political side of it, we know it was not an easy coalition, but a coalition nonetheless. So with you, bringing up the Lib Dem flag at the local level, how do you see that? Because sometimes the relevance to this part of the world is the political perception that's the excuse for people not really being able to change much. So maybe we can take some wisdom from that.
I think wherever you go in the world, people will say that politicians and politics gets in the way. Sometimes it does. I think sometimes politicians do believe that they are the fountains of all knowledge, that they have all the answers. That kind of politics, I think, particularly as I said in the previous section, with the World Wide Web and social media, I think has gone, because there are many millions of people in Malaysia who have got good ideas about how Malaysia can be improved. So I think what I tend to do is say politicians have got to stop labelling themselves as politicians. First and foremost, I'm a citizen of the UK, I'm a citizen of Sheffield, and therefore I've got to understand and pass policies which I'd be happy with. Not just I'm a politician, I'm going to do things, but how do I ensure that the city that I live in, the country that I'm part of, how does it improve? And I think part of that comes back to one of my previous answers, is sharing some of the power. Keep the important decisions, the ones which you really have to make, which you're elected to make at the end of the day, but actually just trust people to make decisions. And actually the other thing is, sometimes accept that you're wrong. There's nothing wrong with being a politician and saying sorry. You know, politicians are human. Sometimes we get things wrong. So I think it's bringing the human into being a politician rather than just having a label.
So you have the local standard to, you know, look at things which is a bit more micro than what we have discussed. I have always been perplexed because we keep looking at Europe and EU. Yeah, understandable because of the colonial past, but European Union, that's such a supranational organization that it takes maturity to reach that level, for better or for worse. But lately, we keep seeing and hearing the voices of the far right, and it's almost to the extreme. You know, BNP, Geert Wilders in Holland. And how do you see that? Because if Sheffield was to be the happiest, then race relations and issues like that must have been settled. Otherwise, people won't be happy because I don't trust my neighbour, you know.
But it comes back to what I said. If you, as a government, whether it be local or national, really start to empower people to share space who they wouldn't normally sit with, or they wouldn't normally go to the shops with, or they wouldn't normally be in the library together, then that's really important to break down difference. Because what I found as a human being, not just as a politician, that a lot of misconceptions about different races is people who don't actually come into contact with somebody of a different race. So I think that's partly important. I think the other thing, I mean, I think it's really interesting you mentioned the European Union. One of the things I said in the conference was I come and I share some of my knowledge here, but actually I take quite a lot back from Southeast Asia. You've got ASEAN. Yeah. When you look at the development of ASEAN over the last maybe 10 years and what it's achieved far more than probably the European Union did within that role. Now, there's still some tensions, I think, about pooling of certain sovereignty, which is the key for the European Union. But actually, I think that this century is the Asian century in terms of the economy, and I think you've got a really good base with the federation of countries working together around the economy in ASEAN to achieve far more than probably the European Union has. But you do raise an important point, and I think the issue with the European Union is how do you actually have a federation of nations which work together around core issues, but it doesn't become too big that people feel that they're losing some of their national identity, because that is important as well.
It's very interesting too. I'm going to skip a bit the JB side of this discussion. I'll come back to that. So with that in mind, when you look at the issue of Greece, and we know how the Germans, of course I'm stereotyping here, but on the average, why should we be paying for their luxury idle, you know, lying by the beach in Greece, for example? So if the union was to work, you must have trust, and you must settle that first before any monetary policies, for example, because the decision might be monetary, but the reasoning for that decision might be totally off from a financial consideration. So how do you look at this? You know, then over here we keep hearing about PIIGS and stuff like that. So what are your views?
Look, I think the issue you've got to remember is, which I think again Southeast Asia does better actually than Europe. Europe set rules about going into the European monetary union. Certain countries didn't meet that, but because it was such a big project, which particularly Germany and France wanted to have, it meant that some of the Mediterranean, the Portugals, the Greece, they went in at the wrong exchange rate and at the wrong interest rate, which has caused the future problems. Cool. So I think the issue about your cooperation within ASEAN is about, once you set the rules, absolutely stick to them, because if not, it causes tension further down the line, is what you're seeing in your example about Greece and Germany, for example, and it also then kind of, I think, fuels the flames of nationalism, because it's felt unfair that they didn't play by the rules. So that for me is a really important issue there. So my view is, in terms of cooperation within Southeast Asia, look, clearly you work in a global economy. I think that if you get it absolutely right, there'll be 4 global powers economically in the next 10 years. Europe, North America, China and ASEAN.
Wow, you are even more optimist than I am. I need to go to Sheffield.
I did say 10 years, not 10
okay,
minutes.
Cool, 10 years given. Let's go for the last break, but once we are back, I want to go back to the issue of World City, and public service delivery is one of your area of expertise. And because you've been inside Intan, you have an idea, if not more, of how we are in that respect. So I'd like to grab your expertise on that particular point, because if we don't deliver in terms of local government, there's no way that we're going to deliver a world-class city. That will be the discussion after this. I'm still discussing how to make JB or Johor Bahru world city, but I'm still also here with Paul Scriven. There's never enough time with great people. So Paul, you're the expert. How do we deliver better to the grassroots from local authorities? Because I look at your profile, he has been a great advocate of community budgeting and working with new and innovative models of public service. So it's in the delivery of public service.
Absolutely key, but just let's think about it as a citizen rather than the local authority or the police or fire or whatever, because that's organisational. When you present yourself to a public service, sometimes your problem is multifaceted. It isn't just the local authority, it isn't just the police, it isn't just fire. And yet why we've done with local services is we've said, actually, I'll deal with this bit because I'm the local authority of you. I'm the fire service, I'll deal with this bit. I'm the police, I'll deal with this bit. So we just passed on. The idea of community budgeting is the place gets a budget. Not a service, but the place. Okay, so in Sheffield, maybe one of the 7 areas gets a budget. You then have the equivalent of a local place civil service who don't work necessarily just for one organisation, but they work for that place. And then, based on the needs of individuals and the needs of that community, they start to reshape service and they start to spend budgets differently around the needs of their local citizens, rather than saying the buck stops there because that's where my organisation stops. And I think that's the key to modern public service delivery. Not organisational, but shaped around individuals. And you force that as a politician by giving money not to organisations but to places, and making people collaborate, whether it be in the fire, whether it be local authority, whether it be health, to deliver services for citizens.
Is there also in the improvement of processes? Because actually, if you have a very aware, alert and mindful public servant, so even though the 7 areas would be under one bureaucracy, that would still have been delivered. But because layers of bureaucracy has taken away that impetus, now we have to go back and break the system to make it work at the local level.
Yes, and that's the key about making sure the money goes to the place and not the individual. It's kind of, some people say chaos theory, or people would say it's actually a good change theory to make changes happen. It's really interesting. The other way to make change, not being that radical, the other things we did in Sheffield before we moved to that, is you have targets for service delivery. And all these targets are set by either bureaucrats in office or politicians sat in other offices. What we did in Sheffield was create citizens' targets. So what we said to people was, what would improve your local green environment? What would improve your education? What would improve making you feel safe? And so those citizens' targets, by asking people and then bringing them together and working out what it was that would do, they became part of the target suite, the KPIs. So you had a combination of the professional need to be done, but also local people saying this is what we need to do, and that drove change as well.
Okay, Paul, now be honest, be hard on us if you want to. Please criticize what you think is our biggest obstacles, for example, in achieving like JB as a world city.
I think being a critical friend, because that's what I am, I think there are probably 3 things. First of all is hierarchy. The first thing is hierarchy within public services. There are lots of Generation Y, lots of junior members of staff who are going to have brilliant ideas. So I'd say, rather than just tell, really listen, and empower them to help make the change that you want to make for the city.
Have you seen that yourself, right?
I've
seen the potential.
I've seen that across the board in Malaysia, so it's not just a JB issue. I think the combination of status has to be broken down. Allow people to flourish no matter where they are in the organisation and listen to their voice. I think the second issue that I would say is, don't be totally driven by A, B, C and D. Be a little bit more inventive. There's very much a route to deliver things within public service within Malaysia. You can't go to D until you've done C, B and A. Sometimes you can be a little bit more creative. So give people at the front line more empowerment and more leeway to do things. And then I think the third one, which would be difficult, I think, but needs to be said, again as a critical friend, sometimes I think the politicians just need to back off. Set the strategic direction, but then monitor the strategic direction. Don't intervene just because you think things are going wrong. Hold people to account. You're not the public service managers.
You've seen other countries in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a mixed reaction to this. Something that they are way better, moving forward, doing things better. Yeah. How do you see Malaysia vis-a-vis the countries surrounding it?
I think it's hard to give one answer to that, because there's pockets of really good things in Malaysia. So if you look at some of the work that Idris Jala's doing with Pemandu, there's some really good stuff there in terms of being much more citizen focused, doing things on the economy, the economic reforms that are going through, even some some great public service reform things with how you're using technology, which is way ahead of the West. So I take some of that back home. So I think there are good things. I think the real issue I'd come back to is this issue of mentality and culture. Don't be frightened across the corridor of what Singapore's doing, but look at what they may be saying about co-production and co-design, which is this empowering citizens to make different decisions. Look at things before the queue that Thailand were doing on tourism and their culture of making making tourists feel welcome, etc. So you do some good things, but there are things to learn around you as well.
Let's end with looking at something specific, like you won't be a world city in the 21st century if you're not on social media.
Correct.
Or you're not online, if you're not Googleable.
Yeah.
So if you Google Iskandar and JB, you'll probably not see story narratives, experience sharing. Because if you look at Priceline.com or TripAdvisor, most of them, the main visited site will be the comments and critique. Because I can see a rating of 1 to 5 and 3 and 4, but that doesn't tell the whole story. It's always the human side. It's about trust. So what would Iskandar and JB be able to do for that? If I Google them up, it wouldn't be about how many billions they were coming in, but it's about how nice the experience of going through living in this area.
You use the experience of real people and real businesses here. So when you go onto the Iskandar website, why don't you get chief executives through their own TV channel actually saying why they moved to Iskandar, how their family are enjoying it here, how it's improved their business? Why don't you get your 500,000 local ambassadors who live in JB starting a hashtag, why I love JB, Instagram, taking pictures, showing things? That's just as important as the formal brochures and the kind of website. So my view is, use your greatest enthusiasts, and actually that's the people who live here. Make sure that you've got the facilities right, the leadership, the basic things about it being a livable JB, a livable city, and then spread it out on social media. Because actually, if I'm living in Sheffield and I want to invest here, I won't just look at what Iskandar's telling me what the city council's doing. I will look at social media, and I will look at what other businesses are saying, and that's just as important in my decision making. So brace it, bring it in, use it, but don't use it to tell people. It's a conversation to get people here.
It's not about the infrastructure, it's about the people and the place. Thank you so much, Paul Scriven, for making the points on the special recording session of Agenda Awani, and terima kasih banyak kepada anda. But I just would like to tease Paul a bit about Sheffield. When you were on the new media, when they were arguing why Sheffield is best in the UK to live in, the happiest, the name of Michael Jackson and the name of big artists that have been to Sheffield to do their concerts, that is one criteria. So JB and Iskandar, you might want to consider that. Terima kasih banyak hantar kepandangan anda sendiri kepada pelbagai platform yang Astro Awani ada. Kita jumpa lagi dalam rancangan yang lain pula. Sekian, selamat malam, terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Thank you.